Well, hello, and welcome to the Scottish Daily Mail Sports Weekend Review. Today, joined by me, Hannah Dewar, and Calum Crowe. Calum, good to see you. John McGarry's on a lovely old holiday today, so it's great to have you stepping into the breach on what is a very, very busy day today. As we record this, it is transfer deadline day, so you're going to be up to your neck, I would imagine, in writing today. You're looking forward to it?
Yeah, it's always a busy day, transfer deadline day. Especially over these past few weeks, you've had so much activity going on at Celtic, Rangers, and obviously Hearts as well with the title challenge that they've put together. They've managed to get some new players in as well, so it's been a very hectic period. But it all sort of comes to a finish today, and then it's just a sprint to the line over these next 4 months or so to see who can win the title. And obviously beyond transfer deadline day, you've got the usual weekend action, and it's the start of the Six Nations build up as well. So it's there's a lot going on.
It is. I've done many transfer deadline days in my career, especially during broadcast, and it's it's slightly hectic. But we're not going to focus too heavily on that at the moment. I want to start off with today's back page on the Scottish Daily Mail and lead with hands off. Celtic snub for a £14 million Engels bid as club closing on Adamu and Mvuka. And Callum, this is about Celtic last night booting out a £14 million offer from Nottingham Forest for midfielder Arne Engels, as boss Martin O'Neill targeted 3 new signings on deadline day. So that's quite a statement to make. And I think there's been an improved offer actually since that headline came in. So 14 million, I think up to 17 million. It's quite a lot of money to turn down.
It is, yeah. We spoke to Martin O'Neill about this yesterday after the Celtic game against Falkirk. It was a fairly sort of routine 2-0 victory. I think he was genuinely quite surprised by it. I don't think he really expected it. I don't think he was fully aware of it. I think the quote from him was actually, "Well, if this has happened, then Forest must have made the bid during the game." Um, I'm conflicted by this, to be honest. Um, Part of me thinks, Arne Engels, he's a player that Celtic signed for £11 million back in the summer of 2024. So he's been there a couple of seasons now. I don't think he's fully hit heights of what Celtic expected from him. He's had good moments. I think there is talent in there. But if you've spent £11 million on a guy who's still relatively young, he came from the Bundesliga in Germany. I think it was Augsburg Celtic signed him from. If you signed a guy for £11 million, you're then being offered 14. That was the offer as of last night. That has now been increased, and as far as I'm aware, I think it's been rejected again. I don't know. I feel as though if they had their house in order with a recruitment model and everything else that goes with that, if you're being offered that kind of money for a guy, you've been offered the chance to make a profit on him, essentially. Part of me feels as though you should look to just cash in, take the money, and bring the next guy in for maybe £5-6 million, and then you go again. That's how a good recruitment cycle should work. But Celtic have got themselves in such a mess over the past year with a recruitment department, or the sort of non-existent recruitment department. They just can't afford to let a guy like Engels go. Although he's not the world beater that maybe Celtic thought he was going to become. Hence why I think they overpaid, to be honest. Um, back in the summer of 24, I think they overpaid for him. They overpaid for Adamida, undoubtedly, and they also overpaid for Austin Trusty. That's a separate issue. Those 3 came in as the 3 sort of marquee signings that summer. Engels being the most expensive of the 3. But like I say, if you've been offered the chance to turn a profit on him, move him on, that's where you should be getting the next guy in, and sort of the cycle begins again. But they've got themselves into such a mess that you know, it should be about you guys coming into Celtic towards the end of the window, not like allowing a Belgian international to leave. So I don't think they can sell him. To be honest, they've backed themselves into a corner, and I think that's kind of what Martin O'Neill touched on last night.
Do you think, I know, as you say, Martin O'Neill was saying that he didn't know anything about it because the offer was perhaps made while the game was underway. But do you think there are 2 things maybe going on here as well? Fear that if they do sell him and they don't manage to get the people that they want in before the window closes, you could lose potentially a very good player. And then the other thing is a bit of gamesmanship, because as we both know, when it comes to the transfer window, agents are chatting, clubs are chatting. You might say, "Oh, we're not going to sell him for X amount of money," and actually, part of it is just a strategy to try and up the money.
Possibly, possibly, yeah. But given the uh, given the levels of anger that are currently, uh, that are prevalent among the Celtic support, I just don't think they can. I don't think the club can sell a player like Engels, especially not when Martindale, not even 24 hours previously, said, "No, look, absolutely, I want to keep him. He's not really for sale." Throwaway line from O'Neill when he said that, unless someone comes in and offers 100 million. Now, clearly that's not going to happen. You can understand the sentiment behind that. What he's saying is, look, you're trying to, you know, assemble a squad here that's capable of going on and winning a league title over these next 3 or 4 months. We cannot be selling uh, a Belgian international without having, sourced a replacement first of all. I think there was a lot of truth in what Anil was saying about it. I don't think he was trying to play any games or inflate the fee. I just don't think he wants to sell the player. There's some overall motive behind it.
By the time this goes out, we may have a couple of Celtic signings, but talk me through. There's two players in particular, Mvuku and Adamu, that are being spoken about very heavily, potentially doing medicals. What do we know about these two players?
I'm not going to lie to you. I don't know much about Mvuka. That one's come a wee bit from left field. I know a wee bit more about Adamu. He was very highly rated a few years ago. He was part. I think he was part of the Red Bull system at one point. He was sort of coming up through that. Very, very athletic, very physical, very quick striker, very strong. I believe he can play across the forward line, but predominantly you're more likely to see him as a central striker. I definitely think he's got assets that Celtic could utilise. It's whether they can sort of help not get his career back on track, but whether they can bring the best out of him. He's kind of drifted around a few clubs in Germany. It hasn't ever really quite worked for him. But from what I've seen, from what I remember of him when he was first sort of breaking through, he was a name that a lot of clubs across Europe became aware of. He was quite raw at that point. I still think he is quite raw. But physically, I think he definitely has the attributes. Sorry, that could do well in Scottish football.
And both, I believe, have international level experience as well. And for Celtic as a team, as a unit, that's something that invariably would benefit them, you'd imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. If these guys can come in and, like you say, they've played international football, if they can come in and what they need from them really is hit the ground running. These aren't long-term signings. Well, I say they're not long-term signings. They're not long-term in the sense that Martin O'Neill almost certainly isn't going to be the manager in 6 months' time. So a new manager is going to have to come in. One of them's a loan signing, I believe. So, a loan with an option, I think. But Celtic need players who can make an impact now. That's the name of the game ultimately. So if they've got international pedigree and they're ready to do that, then it can only be beneficial. I was quite impressed. I was working at the game yesterday, and I must say I was actually quite impressed with one of the other new signings, Thomas Svanchara, the Czech striker. Thought his all-round game was really good. He's quite a sort of. He's not. I wouldn't describe him necessarily as a target man, but he's got a good sort of physique and presence to him. Capable of holding the ball up. Took his goal really well yesterday. Like a really good header from a Kieran Tierney cross. I like to look at him. It's very early days. He's only played 2 games. The first of which was against Hearts at Tynecastle last week. I think there's definitely a player in there. He'll definitely be a player that Martin O'Neill will look to more and more, I'm sure, the more he gets up to speed.
Yeah, because I mean, ultimately, At the moment, it is, as you point out, it's crucial that they just hit the ground running because we've got, what, 14 Premiership games to go until the end of the season. The battle is on for the title. It's so close and so tight at the top. I do find it interesting that people have, over the last couple of weeks, particularly with Rangers coming up quietly through the ranks, they've nailed their hopes to the mast in terms of Hearts potentially winning, Rangers potentially winning, but Celtic have almost been written off. But actually, from what you saw yesterday, and again, it all boils back to, Martin O'Neill and what he's done since he was here the first time and then coming back in. Do you think that Celtic actually are the ones that we should really be watching out for in terms of the league title?
It's very difficult to say. I wrote a piece a few weeks ago when Martin O'Neill came back after the Wilfried Nonce disaster had, you know, after he'd been finally been put out of his misery. I wrote a piece basically saying that Martin O'Neill's return instantly makes Celtic title favourites. Now, I'll be totally honest. Within about a week of writing that piece, I was of a mind to revise that opinion because it was then that Martin O'Neill spoke very, very candidly and laid bare the full extent of just what shambles Celtic are behind the scenes. Sitting in his office, phoning agents and phoning players till like 11 o'clock at night. He painted a very sort of a very interesting picture of exactly how that whole thing was working. Are they favourites? No, I don't think you can say they're. I definitely don't think you can say they're favourites. 6 points behind. There's still so much off-field anger among supporters. Section of the supporters are still banned. The Green Brigade. That undoubtedly has an impact on the atmosphere. I don't think you can say they're favourites. I said this last week when we were asked to do a piece for the paper. I still make Rangers favourites, and I still stand by that. Even with yesterday's result against Hibs, I don't think that's enough. I don't think you can just say, "Oh, well, that's Rangers finished." There's so many more twists and turns to come in this title race. That's, uh, I'm fed up saying it about Hearts, but clearly they're not going away. They are absolutely genuine challengers this season. There's no question of that. Uh, they've lost a couple of key players to injury, Cammy Devlin, Lawrence Shankland, and they're still continuing to tick along quite nicely. But what I would say about Celtic is I don't think you can write them off with Martin. If they'd stuck with Wilfried Nonce, the title would be gone by now. They'd be about 10 points behind easily. The fact they've got a Neil, the fact that they are finally now these players should have been in the door 3 or 4 weeks ago at the start of January. That's a given. But they are now getting them. They're only 6 points behind. I don't think you can write Celtic off. I think it'd be very foolish to do that.
I don't think you can write them off at all. And you mentioned Rangers. Well, Rangers also make the back page today. Roll remains upbeat after stalemate, as you say. Hibernian 0, Rangers 0 was the final score yesterday. The interestingness, Rangers boss Danny Roll insists he won't allow yesterday's goalless draw with Hibs to derail his side's Premiership title bid. Second best for long spells, fortunate to escape with a share of the spoils. And of course, they fell to third in the table on goal difference behind a Celtic, with Hearts 6 points clear at the top. But what he's doing here is he's been pleading for some perspective as he reflected on his teams. And it's Kevin McKenna who writes the article here. Underwhelming performance in Edinburgh. I mean, he's right. I mean, there has to be some perspective, given what we saw under Russell Martin and where they are now. I'm sure that they would have, taken that. But is there something in that? Is there something in the fact that it was an underwhelming performance? Hibs a very good team, so let's not forget that. But should they have done a better job yesterday? What did you think of Skov Olsen, their new signing? Is he cutting the mustard? Is it too early to decide on that?
I mean, obviously, I was working at the Celtic game yesterday, so I came home and watched highlights of the Rangers games. I've caught up with match reports, read a few things about it. From what I could see of the game, I thought it was a hugely underwhelming performance, if I'm honest. They didn't deserve to win the game. They're actually fortunate they didn't lose, to be honest. Especially the first half. Hibs had a number of really, really good chances. If you take it back just a couple of days earlier, Danny Rose spoke when the European campaign came to a close in Porto, that the fate was already decided before that game. He spoke about how now this is a sort of yes, it's almost like a fresh start now. Europe's gone. What's happened previously in the season is gone. We've got, you know, the over these next 3 or 4 months, we can dedicate all our focus to winning the league title, all our eggs in that basket, and they go and serve up that kind of performance in the next game. They didn't look like a team who actually are involved in a title race. It was a pedestrian sort of nothing performance. It wasn't what I expected from them, certainly. Um, they won at Easter Road earlier in the season. They've been on a really good run lately over the past since they lost at Tynecastle, actually, in their last visit to Edinburgh just before Christmas. They've actually been on a really good run, strung together a lot of consecutive victories. Um, I found it all very flat yesterday, to be honest. You mentioned the new boy Andreas Skov Olsen. Yeah, for me, he had absolutely no impact in the game whatsoever. Tochi Chukwueze in midfield, you would hope, and another new signing would bring that freshness. A guy who wasn't involved on Thursday. Um, but I don't know. The whole performance was just very flat, very laboured. They didn't create any sort of chances of note really. And there's a screenshot doing the rounds on Twitter. It was in the closing stages of the game. I can't remember where it was. One of the Rangers players it was in the last minute, and they was about to cross it into the box, and they literally had no players in the box. You think back to a Rangers team, a Celtic team, whoever, a team who are chasing a league title. You're away from home in an important game. In the last few minutes, you would expect to be peppering the opposition goal, getting 5-6 bodies into the box, but it just never happened. So yeah, I found the whole thing extremely flat yesterday from Rangers' point of view.
I think that's why I kind of bring it up, because much as you saying you think the Rangers are still going to be the ones who win the title, at the moment, you've got to treat every game like a cup final. I mean, Derek McInnes said that. Can't remember whether it was before or after the match against Dundee United the other day, but he made that point. Every single game for Hearts is a cup final, and that surely, if you're going to try and win the title this time round, whether you are Celtic, Rangers, whether you are Hearts, whether you are potentially Motherwell, who knows? Every single game is an important game right now, isn't it?
Absolutely. There's no the the more sort of the deeper you get into the season, the margin for error becomes less and less. Um, what Rangers have in their favour is they still have to play Hearts at Ibrox, and they still have to play Celtic at Ibrox. Those two fixtures are sort of in the next round of fixtures. They're both at home. That will go in their favour, I'm sure. Um, but they have to find more. Danny Rowe has made them competitive. That's the thing that's sort of underpinned everything else that he's done at the club. He's made them competitive. He's given them a structure. They don't concede a huge amount of goals, but they're not scoring a huge amount either. I think that's the concern. They're not creating, certainly from open play. They're not creating a huge amount of chances. That's what they'll obviously look to rectify with, over the final few hours of the transfer window. They are actively still trying to get another striker into the club. But I was looking at it yesterday, and there was such a dearth of chances for him. I was thinking, like, even if you put an out and out poacher, a fox in the box type of player, if you put someone like that in that team, I'm still not sure they win the game because they didn't create chances. You've got to have some element of creativity in the team, and that's where that is the hope that Skov Olsen can bring that. He's only 2 games in. You can't write the guy off. He is getting up to speed, but Rangers need him to get up to speed very quickly. He's come in with a huge reputation, predominantly from what he achieved with Club Bruges in Belgium. On the back of that, he then got a big money move to Wolfsburg in Germany. But what Rangers are seeing at the moment is the player who Wolfsburg were happy to let him leave. They're not seeing the Skov Olsen who was at Bruges. I think that's maybe the concern, albeit we are only 2 games in.
Yeah, good points. And that creativity in the final third is hugely important for them. Another story in the back page today. Martindale steps aside for Bartley, living. And unless you've been living under a rock, you'll have heard the news that David Martindale handed over the reins to Marvin Bartley yesterday. And as Gavin McCafferty says here, after the curtain came down on his lengthy spell as Livingston boss. So Martindale appointed sporting director and Bartley steps up as manager after returning to the club as assistant last summer. It's an interesting one, this, because I'm not massively surprised that Martindale has left his position as manager, but it's interesting that they're still keeping him in the club. And I'm not massively surprised that Marv, as he's called, Marvin Bartley, has stepped up to the role as manager, because he's been in the club for a wee while now, and the players all know. And let's face him, is probably been doing part of the job himself anyway. But it is interesting how the club are so kind of entwined and so wedded to David Martindale, who, to be fair, I think since 2014 has been in there since a volunteer and has given a lot of time to the club. But I wonder what more he can bring as sporting director.
Yeah, I do find it slightly strange, if I'm honest. Yeah, that's nothing against David Martindale. He's given terrific service to Livingston over an extended period of time. There's hardly a job in the club that he hasn't done. He's been the handyman, he's been the manager, he's been the coach, he's been the dinner man. He's been everything. But it just feels like one of those ones where I listened to his interview after the game on Saturday. They lost at home to Motherwell, and I listened to his interview, and he just sounded out of energy, almost out of ideas. Like, I think in his heart of hearts, he kind of knew, he knows it's run its course. They're bottom of the table. They're really, really struggling. 6 points adrift, I think they are now. It's just, the whole thing just feels a bit stale, almost as if it maybe could do with someone coming in, fresh ideas. I don't know. I mean, Livingston, they've obviously got new owners who have their own ambitions in terms of where they want to take the club. Do they still see Martindale as a guy who they want? Well, presumably they do. They obviously see him as a guy who they want to retain in some capacity to give some kind of vision of how to take the club forward, and that might well, work. But I don't know. To me, it just feels like a sort of continuation of what's already been happening. Marvin Bartley is a guy who he's served under David Martindale's staff. Is he going to provide a massive impact that saves the club from relegation? I'm not sure he is. In his managerial spell at Queen of the South, I don't think he really pulled up any trees, to be honest. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. Part of me thinks, is the club already planning for being in the Championship next season? Maybe they are. I don't know. But I find it all a bit odd, if I'm honest.
I do think that's a good point that you make about planning for the Championship, because I mean they've had a rancid season. I mean, I don't think they've won a match in nearly 6 months. It's been a long time. Total of 11 points from 24 games, one of the worst at this stage of the season since the turn of the century. But it does speak to the kind of faithfulness of Livingston as a club, I suppose. I mean, normally we see clubs, getting rid of the manager pretty quickly if it starts going wrong after 5 or 6 games anyway. Although you might argue that Russell Martin, the situation was a little bit different at Rangers, but they've been loyal to him. They've stood by him, and whether that does reflect the fact that Martindale's given so much back to the club or not, we will probably never know. But whether that should play a part in football, should you be so loyal to someone despite the results?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what would be really interesting is for David Martindale to leave Livingston and go and test himself at another club. I think he has a good, there's clearly a good coach, a good manager in there, but it's just we've only ever seen him in this one environment. A guy who's clearly in with the bricks at Livingston, knows the club inside out. Has enjoyed a significant level of control and power at Livingston over the best part of a decade. I think it'd be really interesting for him to go out and test himself at I can't think off the top of my head about a club, but someone, I'm sure he will, if he made himself available and he was, clubs were looking, I think he would be absolutely in the frame. So that to me is, for him, that should be the next step, rather than moving upstairs and becoming a sporting director at a club you've been at for 10 plus years. I think he should be looking to test himself elsewhere.
Yeah, and he's also got a great story, of course, having spent time in prison, and he's spoken a lot in the community about that, and tried to G up and bring
Absolutely.
players, who may have suffered adversity in their lives. But if Livy do drop down, it's not easy. Okay, I know they've done it before, but it is not easy in the Championship trying to claw your way back up again, and that's the problem for Livingston. If they do go down again, can they come back up? How much does that impact on their resources? Because they're spending last summer, I think they brought in 14 players, something like that. I mean, it just hasn't worked out for them. So how much they have left in the pot?
Yeah. No, it's a tough school, the Championship. Um, we've seen a number of clubs who they drop down, and it just doesn't. They sometimes they spend a lot of money, or sometimes there's huge cuts. There's been a varying approaches to it. But when you look at Ross County this season, they've made the drop down pretty recently, and it just hasn't worked for them at all. Despite from what I can understand, a pretty handsome budget for that level of football. So there's no guarantees in the Championship. It's an extremely competitive league. I don't think there's a huge amount of difference in terms of quality between a lot of the teams. It's dog eat dog basically. It's a very, very tough league to get out of.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, the final story on the back page is King Carlos reigns supreme. So moving away from football to tennis now. Lovely photo of Carlos Alcaraz with his massive trophy from the Australian Open tennis, which he won yesterday. And it says his Spaniard seals career Grand Slam in record time to deny Djokovic dream in Melbourne. Now, I'm not sure you would have watched the match yesterday, Callum, because you're obviously doing the football gig. But it was, I mean, I watched the whole thing, and it was it was really great to see Djokovic taking the first set, and then Carlos coming from behind to seal the win. But just a massive moment for him as a player. Career Grand Slam by the age of 22, youngest male player ever to do so. I mean, the guy he's phenomenal. And actually, when you watched some of the way that he played yesterday, is defending the shots from Djokovic were extremely, really tough. But then he just goes straight on the attack. I do actually think he's a bit of a one-off, this guy. I do think
Yeah,
he's quite historic.
yeah. You've used the word yourself there, phenomenal, and that's exactly what it is. Yeah, he is a phenomenon. Alcaraz. I think the conversation now is going to very quickly turn to how many is this guy going to win? Can he get up towards the numbers of a Djokovic, a Federer, Nadal? His box office, he's got that sort of star quality. That the likes of a young Federer, a young Nadal, maybe not so much Djokovic. No one's ever really taken to him in the same way that they did the other two. Alcaraz has that. He has that star quality, talent, and abundance to complete the career Grand Slam by such a young age. It's incredible. I think you can only hope that the likes of Yannick Sinner and the rest of them, they all come with him, and that these guys push each other on, and we see another sort of. I don't know if we'll ever see another golden age as such, when you had the big three plus Andy Murray knocking on the door repeatedly as he did. The big three or the big four, whatever it was, if you want to include Murray, which I think we should. I don't know if we'll ever see that again anytime soon. But tennis is a sport that needs personalities. You think back to the glory days of like McEnroe and Bjorn Borg and all these guys. It thrives when they've got real. It's a sport that thrives on having personalities and guys who have genuine star quality, and I think that's what Alcaraz has.
Spot on, I would say. Although I would disagree with you on the Djokovic thing, and maybe he hasn't cut through in terms of personalities. I wasn't too sure years ago about Djokovic, but actually, I've really started, I think, to understand him a bit more over recent years, and having seen him play at tournaments such as Wimbledon, this guy is amazing. What he has achieved is incredible, and actually, his personality is actually very, very strong. It's just that he doesn't he does what he wants. He says what he wants. He doesn't follow, like he doesn't follow the crowds. He's not a sheep. He's a little bit different. Remember when he wasn't allowed to play in the Australian Open over the vaccine, for example. He held his line, and a lot of people give him, a lot of credit for that. So I think he's a very intelligent guy, can speak multiple languages. I think we're only really starting to appreciate him as a personality now. And I think that's one of the reasons that the Australian Open crowd have been so behind him this time, because I think they're finally going, actually, this guy, he is remarkable. And actually, maybe we haven't given him enough credit for what, not necessarily for what he's achieved, but for who he is as a person.
No, I think he's had all the credit in the world. No one has ever doubted his talent or his achievements, his intelligence, as you touch on. No, that's a completely separate thing. I think what has divided a lot of people is there's Djokovic, the player, Djokovic, the talent, and then there's Djokovic, the individual and the person. You know, when he stands on centre court at Wimbledon and gets involved in a war of words with the crowd and invites them to boo him and stuff, it's a lack of class. That's just my opinion on it. He's a guy who I find it difficult to root for him. Maybe it's, I don't know. I take your point about what the Australian Open crowd. Maybe it's gotten to the point where it's one of those ones where the bad guy turns good, almost like the crowd get behind the bad guy, like the villain. I don't know. Maybe there is an element of that, but for me personally, I don't know. I've just always preferred Murray and Federer and Nadal. I found them much easier to warm to. But that's not to take anything away from Djokovic's achievements in the game, which are outstanding.
One day we'll change your perception. But I do think a lot of people, I agree with you. It's just, he's a different kind of personality. But listen, great to have you on, Callum. You've got a busy week ahead for you. Have you got another column coming out this week?
Yeah, column will be out Tuesday it'll be in Wednesday's paper. So we'll see how the rest of the transfer window pans out over today. Then we'll maybe start drawing up some ideas. But and obviously the rugby comes into sharp focus as well. So yeah, we're not short of talking points as always.
No, indeed. Well, listen, thank you once again. And if you want to catch up with all the day's sporting news from the weekend as well, and looking ahead to the weekend, do check out Callum's column. And make sure you follow us across the weekend next week with all the rugby in the Six Nations as well at dailymail.co.uk and on Mail Plus. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.